Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, costume designer Deborah L Scott, joins us to talk about their work on Avatar: The Way of Water. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, we're here to talk about Avatar: The Way of Water, which came out the tail end of last year. I think I should start with saying congrats on the award recognition. I think the most recent one coming from the Costume Designer Guild, which is a big thing. But how have you found the reception of the film and getting all this sort of recognition for it?
Yeah, I think it's been very gratifying. It seems as when you make a movie, and especially I think trying to follow up with the original, you're kind of holding your breath a little bit to see what people think of it, and really you just want it to succeed as a film first of all, just as a piece of a body of work for everyone's, every department. And I think overall, for the most part, it's been quite positive, and critics do their critic thing, and I think that's very valuable for people to have their opinion. I also think that obviously the fans are speaking quite loudly that they really like it and are probably going to return more than once. So I think that shows there's a lot to digest, a lot to look at. It's certainly a lot, even when I saw it for the first time in completion, and I would see snippets constantly, but seeing the whole thing together, it was a little overwhelming.
I enjoyed the movie. It looks stunning, and I think we've seen people have gone back to see it up to 5 times. I've read on the internet, which is
Wow.
Kudos to you guys to being able to do that and see it. But I guess when you're making the film, when you're doing shooting day by day, you don't really get a context of what you're shooting until it sort of gets to the edit and it all becomes streamlined and the scene plays out. Going by, in my research, looking at you've been a close collaborator with James Cameron, working on Titanic together and previous Avatar. Was it just a case of when the project came about, was it a case of just James Cameron calling and just saying, "Look, I'm getting the old band back together. Do you fancy coming on board?"
Yeah, it pretty much. I mean, I think everybody, we had known, just like the public had known for quite some time, that there was going to be a sequel, that we were going to get the band back together, as you say. And so the kind of waiting, it seemed like it went on for a few years at least. And other projects sort of came and went and did other things, and then it would kind of pop up again. And so finally, when it was decided that we were, and I was quite anxious to do it, actually, because I knew that it would be, I had a very interesting and good time on the first one. I knew this one was going to be bigger and better in a lot of ways, and it was going to be quite the creative opportunity and journey. So I was very keen to jump on board with it.
When you've worked with someone closely, and a number of times, it makes it easier to say yes because you know what to expect and you know what's expected of you at the same time.
Exactly.
And with a project like this, where it was talked about for so long, I think first one came out in 2009, and I think this one has been spoken about so much that there was a high anticipation.
Yeah, and we've worked on it. I mean, between that and we've also been working on 3 at the same time, but it was, it was 5 years. So it even, if it got started in 2018, for me, it was many years after the first one, and then many years before we actually got to, hold our breath and see it come out and see how the public responded.
Literally, A Way of Water, you took the path of the Navi and held your breath to get part of it. But you mentioned about it starting 2018, and Like, what does it feel like returning back for a sequel and kind of jumping back into that world, but instead of creating something that's going to be the same with a different clan, how do you want to sort of take a step back to then create something new and something different for the audience to experience?
Well, I think it all definitely starts with the script. So, knowing that the story was going to be, as every sequel is, a continuation, and realizing that it was going to actually be almost real time, right? 13, 14 years later after the first one ended. So the production designers had been on for a long time before I came, and I had a lot of catching up to do, but there was so much to do in such a short amount of time that the understanding of what it was, and the fact that we did have the first movie as a template. They were not the production designers on the first film, but they had worked in the art department. So they were a little familiar as well. And getting immersed back in the world was pretty easy. It was also pretty magical. There's a lot of amazing concept art, a lot of great looking, just landscapes and things like that. So it was pretty enticing. And then it was just kind of get to work, right? Time's a wasted. Get on with it. Let's go.
Because as designers, you probably come on quite early on in the process. And I guess if you have the script in front of you, you know how to break it down and understand what needs to be done, especially where I can imagine for a film like Avatar, where it's not conventional costumes. It's not costumes that you can pop to your local Target, for example, and just be like, yeah, let's get this, let's get that. It's more, it has a lot more tribal elements to it, and a lot more being handmade, and like the synergy of getting different costumes together. I do want to follow back up to that sort of making of the costumes, but I think where I want to go to first is that because it's a very VFX heavy film, and I guess, the average audience member will think that like everything's been computer generated with what they see in front of them. But reading other articles and interviews, like that wasn't the case. But when you're designing something for like this, a film like this, do your fundamentals change? Are there things that you need to adapt, like the color palette for, or the detail for when items get scanned?
Yeah, I think for the most part, the process is very much the same in conception, in the sort of the art of the work is very, very much the same. It's almost as if it just has things added on to it. So, the performance capture is one thing, and the VFX sort of post-production is another incredibly complicated part that most costume designers aren't around for. So it's you have to have a really quick learning curve. And as it's also happening in real time, that some of the computer programs and the way of working to get it done on that side, the post-production side, is actually being sort of invented as you go along, which makes it very challenging. And it really demands, a lot of experts and people that can a camaraderie between the different teams to make it come out right. And knowing that Jim really wanted me to stay on for post-production. I mean, our production was long enough. We had a lot of, the performance capture took a really long time. Doing performance capture underwater had never really been done before the way we did it. So we had to build the suits for that and understand that technology, which took about 8 months' time. And then the looming live action was right out there as soon as we got done. So we had to have a tremendous amount of costumes done for that, a lot of design and makes. And, I did a lot of the props and the gear and all that. So, it's kind of working on multi levels, as well as sort of inventing and fantasizing and bringing about these clans of people that had never been seen before.
It's quite interesting that we were kept on into the post-production process, because I guess once items are scanned and they're being rendered and edited and worked on constantly by VFX crew, they probably have to have an understanding of what the material does in person, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like, I
Yeah,
guess
absolutely.
the movement of a character, the way that it will react in water, and especially when you have like the forest people, the forest clan. You have to excuse me because I'm not going to try butcher the
That's
names
okay.
of them,
That's
the
okay.
name of them all.
I'm not even sure I can say it the right way.
I'm not gonna attempt that. It's the
The forest
difference,
people.
the forest people, and then you have the water clan as well, and how
Hmm.
their costume is going to be different in terms of their look, their feel, the way that's going to be moving, even the breathability factor of it,
Yeah.
and then but also how it's broken down on them and how differently lived in it will be. So forest people, you can imagine it being more muddy and
Mm.
having that sort of more of a dirty vibe compared to
Yeah.
the water clan, sorry.
Yeah, and I think the environment plays in a very, very important role because, especially, as I was designing, as you would, you looking at the environments to which the people live in, because they're basically making their clothes out of, or their clothing, their props, their jewelry out of the environment that's around them. So the materiality was quite different from one to the next, although, where they both had feathers, maybe they had different kinds of feathers coming from different kinds of birds. They both had leather coming from different kinds of animals, but very truly establishing parallels between the two. And it was unusual to stay on for post. But what people don't realize, I think, is in the post production part of it, what you're basically doing is what I'd like to call a virtual fitting. You're taking their when they start creating their 3D models of a moving character, they do need to understand the materiality, but they also need to understand the fit, because the garments are all made to human scale so that actors and artists can wear them to do all the reference tests we need. And the characters are 9 foot tall blue people. So it's a big process of fitting it to a new character body, which as you're designing it, we may not have had those established. And also the weight of things, the movement on the body in different situations was incredibly important. So I think a film like this really opens a door for costume designers to not only learn new things, but be valued in that process. That we made things to a level that was a finish level that they had to then live up to. They had to deliver back as something as beautiful as it looked on a mannequin.
It's all well and good having it's like the sort of I guess there's the idea to practical sort of thinking that it's all well and good being able to create it, but what does it actually feel like when it's in the field?
Mm,
And
yeah, and important information for the actors to have. So when they're performing when they're acting, because it is all very much their bodies, their faces, their emotions, that they understand with their movements. Kind of, they're not wearing a suit, they're not wearing t-shirt and jeans, they're wearing something that is bespoke and original, and they haven't worn before, most likely. So, trying that understanding and that relationship that an actor has with its costume is really important, going both ways.
yeah, and I think as an audience member, you could forget that because even though an actor emotes and is bringing this to life, there's also various departments that have helped them create that character. For
Mm.
example, you guys in the costume department, or hair and makeup, or even props with weapons that they have, or the sort of, even though an actor is kind of, I guess you think of it as like a clay model, all of you have had a hand in shaping that character and being
Hmm.
involved. And also, when you have a fitting for an actor, what feels right for them on them, or how they sort of would be presenting themselves in the outfits.
Hmm. Yeah, it's extremely important, and it's obviously more abstract if you don't have a garment to put on them. The other really wonderful thing about this particular project was that I was basically, especially for the Navi, for the virtual world, I got to design all the hair, all the body art, almost all the props. So you're creating a character in total, right? You're not dividing it up with with a bunch of different people with their hands in it. It's very much a singular vision, of course, with Jim and the actors participating, to the actors to some extent, but that ability to create and a lot of times kind of the attitude of a character that comes through in an initial design sketch would then be sort of translated onto the screen. So it's a very thorough and pure kind of process to be able to do that.
I think as well, when you're so heavily involved in a look of a character, and even though you mentioned that they're 8 foot, 9 foot tall blue aliens, should we say, even looking at pictures now and seeing sort of the detail that goes in, is that mentioning that of the props, the way the hair is sit on the necklaces that they have, it's sort of really builds out what their lives are like on their planet, and how there's certain distinctions. So, for example, the water people, looking at images, they have a lot of sort of more of a lighter yellow colours and that sort of orangey and feathers, whilst the Forest Clan have those darker colours and darker necklaces incorporated into them. There is something that I would like to follow up on that you mentioned earlier. When you're designing costumes where they're going to go into, so for example, being introduced to elements like water, or if they're involved in hand-to-hand combat, what sort of tests and planning and hurdles do you ever have to overcome to get it from the paper stage to actually the character wearing it, and for it to not fall apart when they're in different motions?
Yeah, I think there was a few times. I mean, Jim is very thorough. He's extremely well researched. He is a scientist, basically, as well as a filmmaker and an artist. So he's a stickler for proof of concept. But if you're going to make something, it better hold up under the environment and the actions that it's going to be put through. So, even something as simple as figuring out what the material on the fringe of the back of the costume around the tail would be, to make sure that when it was really underwater, it wasn't tangling or getting in a knot, or, and it was behaving in a way that was beautiful and accurate. So there's no cheating. You can't cheat these things with him. You can't just say, oh, this is pretty, make it work right, to the VFX artist. So we did a tremendous amount of, everything from just literally dunking stuff in the water to see how it behaved to begin with, to see what kinds of materials worked at all, to then, there's a buoyancy test to make sure that something that you made didn't float up too far, or that it had the right kind of buoyancy in the water that you were looking for, that it responded to a current in the way he wanted it to respond. We did the same thing on dry land with wind machines and the actors' movements. And sometimes we would put the actual real garments, which, take a tremendous amount of time to make, on an actor. And that's when you kind of just, bite your nails for a minute, hoping that nothing bad happens to it, because maybe it hasn't been scanned yet, right? And you're like, ugh. So you kind of hold on, and then it almost always worked out beautifully. And, I've had a lot of experience, so it's not like I was stabbing in the dark and not having any idea how materials would behave. But also, we did most of the water reference was done with pieces that we replicated or duplicated, maybe not to as fine a degree, and most often in whites, so that they could be seen in a pool or, at depth or different things like that. So we would remake them, almost do the tests, and then prove that the costume that you were in the process of making or already had made suited what you wanted.
I think it's quite slightly mind-blowing how much effort needs to go into something like that, because that the fact that people have to, as I said, with James Cameron being so thorough and so attention to detail, that it needs to be a proof of concept, and it's not a sort of you haven't created it as a Hail Mary, being like, oh, hopefully
Yeah.
let's see how this is going to play out and how it works.
Right.
But it's
And you definitely learn as you go along, right? That, oh, like that's never going to work, or you might want to add more beads to it if it's going to perform right. But it became actually kind of fun at a point to do that. But it is an enormous amount of work because that, for that reason, even myself, when we would first get started and the animators would say like, well, how's that top going to stay on when she jumps off the cliff into the water? And I'm like, can't you guys just make it stay on? Isn't that what you do? But no, we had to actually do it. We had to make it work to inform them. So it was a little bit twisted, and it would always be kind of a joke for sometimes in the department, like, oh my goodness, they can't you just animate it to do the right thing? So it is a lot of work, and that is definitely Jim's attention to detail and perfection that he demands.
It's like that old saying, like, can't you just fix it in post? Surely
Yeah,
that's not a problem.
exactly. Exactly. But you can't, we just weren't able to get away with that. And so it was a challenge. It was a huge challenge. And, I did an interview with Jim where that's what he said. It's like, what kind of draws him and I together is that we both really like a challenge. And, he lays them down. So you better be there to, I had a wonderful team of people that assisted with all kinds of things, technical things and artistic things and things like that to keep you on the right path.
I can imagine that he keeps people on their toes in terms
Oh
of
yes.
on when he's around, and it's just like, wow, okay, we're gonna have to do this, we're gonna have to do that, because I think there's when you mentioned as well about proof of concept, I think there's a famous story on Aliens where they built the Marines suits, but then he would put them through their paces, so somebody would be wearing it and then they would run down a corridor, crash into the wall, and I think at one point it just all kind of like it all just broke off their bodies, and it was just like, wow, you need to really make these more durable.
Yeah, it has to be real. Everything needs to be as real as possible. That's definitely true. That story does not surprise me.
When you mentioned about your team and having the right people around you, how do you go about getting those people in and collaborating with them to make sure that you can get the best possible costume ready for each character?
Well, in Los Angeles, we had a much smaller team, and it was a lot of people that I had worked with before, or people that sort of would come in on the project and work their way up through the ranks, where that they got it, they could do it, and you could trust them. The artistic part of it was most of the costumes and the live action costumes, but also the Na'vi costumes were built at Weta Workshop in New Zealand. And I had worked there before, so I was a little familiar with some of the people. But when I went there, I was basically kind of assigned a team. So it was a very interesting few months of getting to know each other, getting for them to understand me. And they weren't really used to having a designer come down and be there with them on a daily basis. So, and I would travel back and forth from Los Angeles there and come back, every few weeks I was going back and forth to keep everything, all the plates spinning. But they had to understand me. No one was able to read the script but me. So it was also, you had to really talk about things in a vague way. And so I would describe characters to them. And so it was really for me getting used to a brand new group of people all at once, which was a little daunting. However, having said that, Richard Taylor, who runs Weta Workshop, hires very, very qualified people. And for the most part, it was absolutely smooth. And it took a while for me to start to understand what people could do, right? What was your specialty? What were you good at? What could you bring to the process? And that went with the designers, the artists that drew the costumes, to the makers, which was almost more important because we were making things that we didn't even quite understand until you start making it. Kind of, it's like what comes first. It was really, really hard to say. But, I had one gentleman that worked with me. He was a prop maker, but he had started there. He was quite young and he had only been at What a Workshop for a little while. And he came under a student program there and he worked in 3D modeling. But for me, all of a sudden, he was the guy who was doing a lot of carving, like hands-on, literally carving with his hand, with a piece of wood or a shell or something that I would hand to him, and very, very talented. Had never done it before. I didn't know that. So one day I walked up to him and I'm like, did your grandfather teach you how to whittle, or why don't you learn all these skills? And he went, no, this is my first time doing it. And so it was very quickly that I realized that no matter where you are in the world, you can find people that have enormous talent in something. You just have to understand it, find it, and bring it out of them. Allow them the time to learn what they're doing, what the language of the movie is, and being encouraged to express themselves. So it was a really fun time. And there were many times where I would sit down and we'd have a perplexing costume and a few pieces that I had to make a couple of times because it wasn't quite hitting the mark for me. And I said, nope, we need to start over, or we get halfway down the road with some material. I'm like, nope, not the right material. Let's start over. And I tended to, on occasion, bring people together from a lot of different departments and kind of just sit down and brainstorm with them. And I think it really set people's imaginations free. It gave them this confidence. Many of these people had never been asked before what they thought. In a working environment, that's not as normal as you might think, right? So the ability to sit together and say, we have this piece, here's how it looks on paper. How are we going to make it look in 3D on an actor, on a mannequin? And it was pretty great. It was really a good team building thing. And it's not like many people, that get that comfortability to throw out an idea and have it be rejected, start over. It's a wonderful way to free the creative spirit and the mind.
Just going back to that sort of the first part where you're talking about meeting with people and having to be vague on your ideas because you don't want to spoil. Well, no, you don't want everybody coming. You don't, not necessarily spoil, but reveal too much and get in trouble. But but it's also just funny that you have that sort of experience of like, I can tell you this thing, but I'll need to redact this sentence and then try to weave a way of explaining it, but then also collaborating in different ways. But then having, when you mentioned about people never been asked their opinion about things, must have been quite refreshing for them an experience as well. Because
I think so.
Because like as a creative, there are things that you'll have your experience in and you will know what is the right outcome, right thing to do to get the right outcome. But then sometimes there's just those little missing ingredients from people that they could be sprinkled in to make it better, or to even improve the way that you're working or what you're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately you have to have one person that's the head of the department, and I was the guiding factor. But sometimes really imaginative things happen when you're in a little bit of a void, when you're not sure, and you can say quite plainly, I'm really not sure. What do you think? And, people didn't have their feelings hurt if they weren't listened to, which is pretty wonderful. And I think the artists that worked with me that's why they hung in there so long with the project and worked tirelessly day after day after day, because they were very, very much invested in what they were doing.
As I said, I think once you get somebody invested in a project, no matter what field you're in, those people will run through a brick wall for you.
Yeah, truly. And it's really gratifying, huh?
Yeah. And I think when you have those sort of people, they're the sort of people that you just like, I can rely on them and not worry about something going wrong. Or you can, you don't need to worry about anything if you give them instruction or ask for their advice, because they'll always be sort of honest about it as well.
Yeah. And you'll find your way together, right? And they respect you. So if you have a different idea and you really, once in a while you kind of would come up a thing where to a project, and people do tend to get stubborn a little bit. We all do that. We kind of lock in. And I think it's important to try and not do that, because it gives way to some pretty great stuff when you keep your mind open. I think that's in any art form, really.
Yeah, and it's the same, just the whole collaboration process. With films, if you watch the credits, it takes the whole army to,
Yeah.
To put one together,
Yeah.
to all pull in the same direction and get and really create what you guys want to create and be proud of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I really am very proud that I think for the most part, the team, some people would be there for a while and then leave, but for the most part, it was a very consistent group of people, and all very much came away from the project with very, very good things to say about it, good things to say about their time. And that's just very, very great to hear as the leader, that everyone was happy. And that investment that people make is, you can't make that up. You have to earn it. It doesn't just come, yes, people had respect because you're the designer and they're supposed to, but to sort of dig down below that and really find people who are committed on the same level that you are, because I think also they see that I'm quite committed when I'm working. I'm very hands-on. And I think, that seeing that with your coworkers is really important.
Yeah, 100%. And it's there. I think that's the difference between being feared at work and being respected. If you're feared, then it's people being scared to sort of get involved and enjoy themselves. They don't want to be walking on eggshells. But if they're respected, then there's like, you have a lot more fun at work and a lot more sort of, I don't know, you as you said, you enjoy it more. You're going to be proud of it more. You'll give it you'll put in a bit more effort. And if you're seeing that your boss is hands on, then you're in the trenches with the right person.
Yeah, I think you're very accurate in those comments. I mean, I think that's kind of the goal. It's the best of both worlds, really, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or all worlds.
Exactly. So this leads to my final question. What was your favorite look to design?
Oof, wow. That's a very difficult one. Each look had its own journey, but I think when I have to answer that question, I think one of the first tops that Neytiri wears, which is a kind of a skeleton, a bone piece with leaves and high neck piece that's like a chest plate. That piece went through many, many revisions before I got it right. And it was that was kind of a real icebreaker for me with Neytiri, really finding the way into her character, because I think it represents in the movie, it shows a strength, she's a warrior again. It's very present. It's majestic, but yet it's very delicate and feminine. So it sort of encapsulated all those things in one costume piece. And it says a lot about her. And like I said, it took a few rounds to get there. The pieces, they would always, every time we would try to do something, it would turn out too heavy or too solid or not, it was hard to find the fragility in the piece. And in actual reality, the piece is quite fragile. The bone pieces were 3D printed and they're very thin and small. So, the tendency for it to break, the weight of it on its own, and it was challenging to figure out how to get the weaving through there so that it looked natural. But I think it was trying to find that fragility in the piece that was the most challenging. And when we finally got it, it says everything I wanted it to say.
I think that ties in nicely with the idea of how much, as a department, you're involved in creating the character and how important your role is in bringing those characters to life and having them show them in that lived-in world of Pandora. And I think that it beautifully ties the episode together.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoy speaking with you, and it's very fun to talk about the process and talk about your coworkers. We owe each other a lot, I think.
Yes, and without you, they don't have a job, and without them, you don't have a beautiful outcome. So it's a nice yin. Oh, I can't even pronounce it.
Yang.
There you go. Thank you very much.
It is. It does create a balance that is necessary, very necessary to make beautiful work, I think.
I 100% agree with that. Deborah, thank you again for joining me today. Avatar: Way of Water is currently in the cinemas, but I'm sure it will be coming out on Blu-ray, DVD, and streaming in the next few weeks or maybe month or so.
Yeah, hopefully, right? Everybody needs to try to go to the cinema to see it, because I think you're gonna miss a lot on a smaller screen.
1000%. You need to shoot it on the biggest screen possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you again.
All right.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.